The chandeliers blazed above the ballroom, scattering fractured stars across marble floors, as if the night sky itself had stepped indoors. Elena's shoes clicked too loudly on the polished stone, every step echoing like an announcement of how out of place she was. Her dress, though carefully chosen, whispered of clearance racks, not couture. She reminded herself again that she was only here to leave a gift, smile politely, and vanish before anyone noticed. It was supposed to be quick, invisible, safe, but fate never asked permission. She saw him first in a reflection, a flash of a familiar smirk in the tall mirror framed in gold. Her heart stumbled, her breath seized. Thomas. 2 years had passed since she'd last seen him. Yet the sharp sting of memory struck like it had all happened yesterday. He was laughing, leaning close to someone new, his hand resting easily at her back, the same way it once had with Elena, that easy charm, that confidence that had always made her feel small. He hadn't changed. And worse, he had noticed her. Their eyes locked for the briefest flicker, but it was enough. That cruel recognition, that tilt of his head that meant he was coming closer. Already, his stride cut through the crowd like a predator who knew exactly where his prey was hiding. Elena's chest tightened. Not here, not tonight. She had planned so carefully to slip in and out, unnoticed, untouched by the ghosts of her past. Yet the ghosts had sharp eyes and faster feet. Panic surged, threatening to spill out of her in trembling waves. She searched the room frantically, desperate for escape, for anyone that might shield her. And then she saw him. He was standing near the marble columns, apart from the glittering laughter and chatter of the wealthy crowd. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it seemed to belong only to him. He didn't mingle, didn't smile, didn't play the part of a man desperate to be seen. Instead, he observed quietly, as though the party was a puzzle he was in no hurry to solve. A glass of red wine rested in his hand, and his posture spoke of quiet command. The kind that didn't need attention to feel powerful. Elena didn't have time to think. Her feet carried her across the floor before reason could catch up. Her heart hammered louder than the music. She reached him in a breath, and without hesitation, slipped her hand onto his arm. "I know this is crazy," she whispered, her voice urgent, trembling, "but please, pretend you know me." Just for a moment, the man turned his head slowly, and for the first time Elena saw his face up close. Striking, a mixture of strength and stillness that unsettled her. His hair was dark with streaks of silver at the temples, his jaw square, his eyes the stormy shade of gray-blue that belonged to skies before rain. For a heartbeat, surprise flickered there, quickly followed by a spark of amusement, and then something softer, understanding. "Pretend to know you?" His voice was deep, calm, carrying the faint trace of an accent that hinted at faraway places. "Yes. Please," Elena urged, glancing over her shoulder. Thomas was nearly there, his smirk growing, each step dripping with the confidence of unfinished battles. The stranger's gaze followed hers, sharp and assessing. He saw Thomas, and something shifted in his expression, not possessiveness, not curiosity, but recognition, as though he understood exactly what it felt like to need to disappear. He set his wine glass down on the table with deliberate care and turned to face Elena fully. "Of course," he said simply. The certainty in his tone was a shield she hadn't expected. "How would you like to do this?" Elena nearly laughed with relief, though it trembled on the edge of a sob. She hadn't thought this far. Her plan had ended at desperation. Her voice caught, words stumbling before they could form. But she didn't need to finish. Thomas's voice cut the air like a blade. "Elena," he drawled, his smirk sharp, his eyes shining with the pleasure of cornering her. The stranger shifted almost imperceptibly, angling his body closer to hers, as though he had been doing it for years. The movement was natural, seamless, as though Elena belonged at his side. And when Thomas's eyes flicked between them, a flicker of doubt, however small, passed through his gaze. Elena felt her pulse slow, not because she was safe, but because for the first time in years she wasn't standing alone. She hadn't meant for her panic to trap her against a stranger, but something about the way he stood, the steadiness in his presence, hinted at danger of a different kind, the kind that made her want to lean closer. Even though every instinct screamed she should run, she didn't yet know his name. She didn't yet know that her one desperate choice tonight would bind her to a man who had the power to rewrite her future. She only knew that Thomas had stopped smiling, and the stranger at her side was watching him with the quiet, unshakable patience of someone who had already decided not to let go. Thomas's smirk lingered, but it no longer had the same power it once did. His eyes flicked between Elena and the man beside her, searching for cracks, for proof that she was still the girl he could shrink with a single look. Yet what he found instead was a stranger's steady hand, resting lightly against the small of Elena's back, a gesture that looked so natural, so certain. It unsettled even him. "I didn't know you'd be here," Thomas said smoothly, though the edge in his tone betrayed him. "You always hated parties like this." Elena's throat tightened. Old memories rose unbidden, his criticisms, his barbed reminders that she didn't belong. For a moment, the weight of it threatened to crush her again. But then the stranger beside her shifted slightly, a quiet presence grounding her in the storm. His silence carried strength, and it gave her the courage to speak. "People change," she said, her voice softer than she wanted, but steady enough. Thomas's smirk faltered, then returned sharper, more mocking. "And who is this?" He gestured toward the stranger, his tone dripping with suspicion. "A new friend? Doesn't look like your type, Elena." The stranger met Thomas's stare calmly, unbothered by the hostility. His eyes held a weight that silenced the air around them, a patience that made Thomas falter before he even spoke. Finally, in that low, deliberate voice, he answered, "Her choice of company isn't your concern." It wasn't loud, it wasn't harsh, but it was final, carrying the kind of authority Thomas had never been able to fake. Elena felt Thomas stiffen, though he quickly masked it with another smirk. He leaned closer, as if to whisper something cruel only she could hear. But before he could, the stranger slid his arm more firmly around her waist. The simple motion sent a jolt of warmth through her, unexpected and disarming, but also protective. "You should go," the stranger added. His voice was still calm, but it held the weight of someone used to being obeyed. For a heartbeat, Thomas hesitated. He wasn't used to being dismissed. Not by Elena, not by anyone. But there was something in the stranger's gaze that made even him think twice. With a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, Thomas finally stepped back. "This isn't over," he muttered, and with one last glance at Elena, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Silence filled the space he left behind, though the music and chatter of the party carried on around them. Elena realized only then that she had been holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, her body trembling with the aftershock of fear and relief. "Thank you," she whispered, turning toward the man who had just saved her from crumbling under Thomas's shadow again. His eyes softened, though his expression remained unreadable. "You don't need to thank me," he said, "but you do need to tell me why a man like that still has this much power over you." Elena froze. The question cut to close, peeling back layers she had carefully hidden. She wasn't ready to answer, not yet. Instead, she offered a nervous smile, trying to deflect. "You were convincing, more than I could have hoped for. I should probably let you get back to your evening." But when she moved to step away, his hand didn't leave her arm. It wasn't forceful, but steady, as though he had decided something before she had. "You asked me to pretend," he said quietly. "I don't mind pretending, but I don't do things halfway. If you want this man to believe you've moved on, then for tonight, you'll stay at my side." The words sank into her, heavy and unsettling. Part of her wanted to protest, to insist she couldn't impose on him any longer. Yet another part, the part still trembling from Thomas's approach, felt strangely safe with him. Safer than she had felt in years. Her voice wavered. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Something flickered in his gaze, brief but unmistakable. "Maybe I know enough." Before Elena could respond, a new song swelled through the ballroom. Couples drifting toward the dance floor. The stranger's eyes didn't leave hers as he extended a hand. "If we're convincing," he said softly, "then we should dance." Elena's breath caught. She should have said no. She should have walked away before this went further. But her hand moved before her mind could stop it, sliding into his. His grip was steady, warm, and when he led her onto the floor, it felt less like pretending and more like stepping into a life she had never dared to imagine. The music wrapped around them, soft and haunting, and as they moved together beneath the chandeliers, Elena realized something she hadn't expected. This wasn't just an escape. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name, but already feared to lose. The music drifted through the ballroom, slow and elegant, but Elena barely noticed the melody. Every step she took with the stranger felt like a step into dangerous territory, into something she hadn't prepared for. His hand rested lightly against her back, guiding her as if he had always known her rhythm. And the steady warmth of his presence unsettled her more than Thomas's cruelty ever had. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something she couldn't name. Her pulse beat louder than the orchestra as she tried to make sense of him. Who was he, really? He had stepped into her chaos without hesitation, silencing Thomas with nothing more than calm certainty. No one had ever defended her that way before, yet she didn't even know his name. She finally gathered the courage to ask, her voice quiet enough to be swallowed by the music. "You never told me who you are." For a moment, he didn't answer. His gaze held hers, unblinking, searching in a way that made her feel exposed. Then, finally, he spoke. "Adrian." The name lingered between them like a secret. Steady and certain. "Adrian." She repeated it silently, feeling how it fit him. Strong, uncomplicated. Yet there was an edge to it, as though the syllables carried weight she couldn't see. "Elena," she said softly, though part of her suspected he already knew. "I know," Adrian replied, his voice low, almost too low to hear. The certainty in it startled her. Before she could question what he meant, a shadow passed at the edge of the dance floor. Thomas, leaning against the bar again, his narrowed eyes fixed on them. The smirk was gone. In its place was something sharper, colder. He was watching, calculating, and the weight of his stare pressed against Elena's chest. Adrian noticed. He didn't look away, didn't break the smooth rhythm of their steps, but his grip on her hand tightened just slightly, anchoring her. "Don't look at him," he murmured. "If you do, he wins." Elena forced herself to lift her chin, to keep her eyes on Adrian's. There was something in his gaze that steadied her, an unspoken promise that she wasn't as small as Thomas had always made her feel. For the first time, she believed it. The song ended, applause rising around them, and Adrian guided her effortlessly off the floor. Instead of releasing her hand, he kept it, leading her toward one of the side doors that opened onto a balcony. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of roses from the garden below. Elena inhaled deeply, as though she hadn't been able to breathe until now. "Better?" Adrian asked, his tone softer outside the noise of the ballroom. "Yes," she admitted, though her voice trembled. "I didn't expect tonight to turn into this." Adrian leaned against the railing, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she couldn't. "Sometimes the unexpected reveals more than the things we plan," he said. Elena searched his face, curious and cautious all at once. He spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much, someone who didn't waste words. And yet there was something almost protective in the way he looked at her, as though he understood her struggles without needing an explanation. "You didn't have to help me," she whispered. "But you did." He considered her for a long moment. "Because I know what it feels like to stand in a room full of people and feel like you don't belong. And I know what it looks like when someone tries to use that against you." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She wondered what stories he carried behind those storm-colored eyes. What scars had taught him to recognize hers so easily? Before she could ask, the balcony door opened. A waiter stepped out briefly, setting down a tray. But it wasn't the waiter who caught Elena's attention, it was Thomas, lingering just inside the ballroom, his stare burning through the glass like a warning. Adrian followed her gaze and exhaled slowly, almost tiredly. "He won't give up easily." Elena's stomach knotted. "He never does." Adrian straightened, his presence suddenly sharper, more deliberate. "Then it's time he learns you're not alone anymore." The words sent a shiver through her, not because of fear, but because of the strange comfort in them. For so long she had fought her battles alone, shrinking under the weight of someone else's power. Now, with Adrian at her side, it felt like the ground had shifted. She wasn't sure what it meant, or where it would lead, but she couldn't deny it. Something had begun tonight. She didn't know that Thomas's obsession was about to grow darker, or that Adrian's world was far more dangerous than the ballroom's glittering walls suggested. All she knew was that her life was no longer on the safe path she had carefully planned. It was twisting, turning, pulling her toward a man who had already decided not to let her walk away. The night air wrapped around Elena like a fragile promise, cool and scented with roses, but inside the ballroom, she could still feel Thomas's stare pressing against her back through the glass. His persistence had always been dangerous quiet at first, then consuming. Tonight, she sensed that his interest wasn't just about unfinished history. It was about pride, control, and the way he hated losing anything he once claimed as his. Adrian stood beside her, silent, but not absent. His stillness carried weight, as though every decision he made was deliberate. He wasn't the kind of man who rushed to fill silence. He let it stretch, giving her space to breathe. That alone unsettled her. She wasn't used to someone letting her exist without demanding more. "You don't have to protect me," Elena said quietly, though even as the words left her lips, she felt the untruth in them. She wanted him to stay, needed it, even if she couldn't admit it out loud. Adrian turned toward her, his gaze steady. "You asked me to pretend. I agreed. But don't confuse this for protection. You don't deserve. You don't owe me anything for it." The calm certainty in his tone pulled at her. She wanted to believe him, but her past whispered otherwise. People didn't help without a reason. Not in her world. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, her voice almost trembling with the question. Adrian didn't flinch. "Only honesty. At least with yourself." The words settled between them, heavier than any bargain. Elena looked away, her eyes tracing the glow of the city lights in the distance. She wanted to tell him about the years Thomas had stolen from her, about the way she had learned to shrink her voice until it was almost gone. But the story felt too raw to hand to a stranger, even one who seemed to see through her already. Before she could respond, the balcony door opened again. The sound of laughter spilled out, followed by Thomas's familiar voice, smooth and deliberate. He wasn't coming onto the balcony this time, but his presence lingered, too close, too watchful. Elena stiffened. Adrian noticed instantly. His hand brushed against hers, not a command, not possession, but a grounding touch that told her he had already taken measure of the threat. "Let's leave," Adrian said softly, his decision made before she could argue. "This isn't the place to fight shadows." Elena hesitated. Leaving meant stepping further into his world, into the unknown. But staying meant letting Thomas chip away at her resolve, bit by bit, until she broke. For once, she didn't want to be the girl who stayed frozen. She nodded. They slipped quietly through a side exit, the noise of the ballroom fading behind them. Outside, the night was alive with the hum of the city, distant horns, footsteps, the soft rhythm of life beyond the gilded walls. A sleek car waited at the curb, its driver stepping forward immediately at Adrian's appearance. The small display of deference startled Elena, whoever Adrian was. He wasn't just another guest at a party. "Where are we going?" she asked, though she found herself moving toward the car without protest. "Somewhere Thomas won't follow," Adrian replied simply. The car pulled away, the city lights blurring past the windows. Elena pressed her palms together in her lap, her mind racing faster than the streets outside. She had known Adrian for less than an hour, yet she was sitting beside him, leaving everything familiar behind. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt strangely inevitable, as though this night had been waiting for her all along. Adrian broke the silence. "You're stronger than you think. He feeds on the part of you that doubts that. The sooner you stop giving him that, the sooner he loses his hold." His words struck deep, echoing truths she had long buried. She turned her head, studying him. His profile was sharp against the glow of passing streetlights, his expression unreadable. "Why do you care?" she asked before she could stop herself. For the first time, a flicker of something, pain, perhaps, or memory crossed his features. "Because I've seen what happens when someone forgets their worth, and I won't watch it happen again." Elena's breath caught. There were stories behind those words, stories that hinted at losses he hadn't shared. She wanted to ask, but something about the weight in his tone told her he wasn't ready. The car slowed, turning into a quiet street lined with trees. They stopped before a townhouse with warm light spilling from the windows, elegant without being ostentatious. Adrian opened the door for her, waiting. Inside, the space reflected him, refined, minimal, yet filled with details that spoke of a life lived fully. Shelves of books lined one wall, their spines worn with use. A grand piano sat in the corner, polished but not decorative. It was an instrument meant to be played. Elena moved cautiously, her fingers brushing the edge of a book on the shelf. "This doesn't feel like someone who spends his nights at parties," she said softly. "I don't," Adrian replied, his voice low. "But sometimes life places us in rooms we'd rather avoid." His gaze lingered on her then, and for the first time that night, Elena felt something dangerous stir inside her, not fear, not panic, but the faint beginning of trust. She didn't know if she could afford it. She didn't know what it would cost. But as Thomas's shadow stretched further behind her, she felt herself stepping closer to Adrian's light. Unable to resist, she didn't yet realize that this choice would change everything. The townhouse was quieter than the city outside. Yet the silence inside seemed heavier, more deliberate. Elena stood near the piano, her fingers grazing the smooth black surface as though the touch alone might explain something about the man who had brought her here. Adrian moved with quiet ease, taking off his jacket and placing it neatly over the back of a chair. He was composed, measured, every movement controlled, as if nothing ever startled him. And yet Elena couldn't shake the feeling that his calm wasn't natural. It had been learned, carved out of something harder. She turned toward him, words gathering in her chest before she could stop them. "You keep stepping in like you've known me forever. Why?" Adrian studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because I recognize the look in your eyes. It's the same one I saw in the mirror for years." Her breath caught, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he moved to a cabinet along the wall and poured 2 glasses of water, sliding one toward her. Elena accepted it, though her hand trembled slightly around the glass. She wanted to press him, to ask what ghosts haunted him, but his silence warned her that some truths weren't ready to be spoken. Before she could decide whether to pry, the soft vibration of Adrian's phone broke the moment. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening, the first crack in his calm demeanor. With a quick swipe, he silenced the device and set it face down. "Was that about Thomas?" Elena asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Adrian's eyes flicked to hers, unreadable. "No, but men like him are predictable. He won't stop. Not tonight. Not until he convinces himself he's still in control." The certainty in his voice made her shiver. He spoke as if he'd already mapped Thomas's every move. She wondered how many men like Thomas Adrian had faced before. Elena moved toward the window, looking down at the quiet street. For the first time since the ballroom, she felt the sharp edge of fear again, not just of Thomas, but of herself. She had run straight into Adrian's world, asking him to pretend, and now she was here, caught in something larger than she could name. "Maybe I should leave," she said softly. Though her voice lacked conviction, Adrian's gaze followed her, steady and unyielding. "If you leave, he'll find you, and he'll take your fear as an invitation." Elena swallowed hard, the truth in his words cutting deep. "Then what do I do?" For the first time that night, Adrian stepped closer, his presence surrounding her without pressing too hard. "You stand your ground, and you stop letting him write your story." The words settled inside her like sparks, small but insistent. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not as someone fragile to be pitied, but as someone capable of rising. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt still lingered, heavy and familiar. Her thoughts fractured when headlights swept across the window. A car slowed outside, idling for too long. Elena's stomach dropped. She knew without seeing. Thomas. Adrian's jaw tightened, his calm sharpening into something colder. "Stay here," he instructed quietly. Elena reached for his arm instinctively. "No, if it's him, if it really is him, he won't listen to you either." Adrian looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, something that felt like trust forming in both directions. Finally, he gave a slight nod. "Then you'll see what kind of man he's chosen to challenge." The doorbell rang, sharp and jarring in the silence. Adrian didn't flinch. He moved with the same measured certainty as always. But Elena noticed the tension in his shoulders now, the way his hand lingered for a fraction of a second on the door handle before pulling it open. Thomas stood there, his smile tight, his eyes burning with the false charm she knew too well. "Elena," he drawled, as though nothing separated them. "You left in a hurry." I thought we could talk. Adrian stepped slightly in front of her, his frame blocking Thomas's view. You've already said enough. Thomas's smile flickered. And who exactly are you? Her bodyguard? Her rescuer? He leaned to the side, trying to catch Helena's gaze. You don't have to hide behind strangers. You know me. You know us. Elena's chest tightened, her heart pounding against the old chains of memory. She wanted to retreat, to let Adrian shield her completely. But his words from earlier echoed in her mind. Stop letting him write your story. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but louder than she expected. No, Thomas, I don't know you anymore. And you don't know me. Thomas froze, just for a breath, thrown off by the defiance in her tone. Adrian's eyes flicked toward her briefly, a quiet spark of approval there before he returned his focus to Thomas. You should leave, Adrian said, calm but edged with warning. The air thickened. The tension coiled like a storm about to break. Elena didn't know what Thomas would do next, or what Adrian was truly capable of if pushed. But one thing was clear, the game had changed. She was no longer running, no longer hiding. For the first time, she was standing between who she had been and who she might become. And Thomas wasn't prepared for that. The silence stretched in the doorway, heavy and unyielding. Thomas stood with that familiar smirk that once bent Elena's will. But tonight it no longer held the same sway. The air between them felt charged, as though every unspoken word, every wound left festering from their past, hovered like static waiting to spark. Adrian didn't move, didn't posture, but his presence filled the space in a way that made Thomas seem smaller. Though he would never admit it, Elena's pulse thudded in her ears. She had spoken the words she'd been too afraid to say for years. I don't know you anymore. For the first time, Thomas had faltered, even if only for a moment. That tiny fracture in his confidence gave her strength she hadn't expected to feel. Move aside, Thomas said finally, his smile returning though thinner, sharper. She and I have unfinished business. Adrian's voice was calm, steady. The only business you have is learning how to walk away. Thomas's jaw tightened, his mask cracking. He leaned forward, his eyes cutting past Adrian to find Elena. Do you think this changes anything? You can play dress up with strangers, but I know you. I know what you're afraid of. Elena's hands curled into fists. The old fear rose like a tide, threatening to drown her. But beneath it was something else, something fierce and rising. She stepped forward until she stood beside Adrian, not behind him. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. No, Thomas, you only know the girl you broke, not the woman standing here now. The words landed like a strike. Thomas blinked, caught off guard, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but Adrian's voice cut in, low and final. You've lost. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even sharp, but the authority in it made Thomas bristle. His pride stung more than his anger. He took a step back, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all. This isn't over, he said, but the conviction had drained from his tone. With one last glare, he turned and walked down the steps, his figure swallowed by the waiting car. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was louder than the confrontation itself. Elena's legs trembled, her breath uneven. She had done it, spoken back, stood tall, refused to let him script her anymore. Relief surged through her chest, tangled with disbelief. Adrian's gaze softened as he looked at her, though the steel beneath it never vanished. You did more than face him tonight, he said quietly. You broke free. Her throat tightened, emotions rising too fast to contain. I couldn't have done it without you. Adrian shook his head. I didn't give you that strength. It was already there. You just needed to see it. The words struck her deeper than anything Thomas had ever said. She blinked against the sting in her eyes, realizing how long she had been waiting for someone not to save her, but to remind her she was capable of saving herself. For a long moment, they stood in the quiet, the city hum faint beyond the walls. Then Adrian stepped closer, his voice softer, edged with something she hadn't heard from him before. You asked me to pretend tonight, but there was nothing pretend about the way you stood against him, or the way you looked at me when you did. Her breath caught. She searched his eyes, seeing shadows there, yes, but also a steadiness that made her want to believe. He had secrets, truths he hadn't spoken. But she felt something undeniable. He had chosen to stand with her, not for her own sake alone, but because he believed in the woman she could be. Elena smiled faintly, the weight of the evening finally loosening from her chest. So what happens now? Adrian's lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile, rare and fleeting. Now, you stop running, and if you let me, I'll walk beside you. Outside, the street was quiet, but somewhere in the distance, life carried on. Elena knew Thomas wasn't gone forever. Men like him never disappeared completely. But for the first time, the thought didn't paralyze her. She wasn't the same woman who walked into that ballroom, hoping to go unnoticed. She was the woman who had faced her past and chosen to rise above it. And beside her stood a man who had stepped out of the shadows, not to rescue her, but to remind her of her own light. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And though she didn't yet know where it would lead, the thought no longer frightened her. It thrilled her.